if the game is really good, the fans don't care about you, right? And what that means is like, if the game is tight, everybody's really hyper-focused on the game, and you could be doing the craziest antics on the sidelines and no one's paying attention. And I think that that's a good lesson for marketing, because sometimes no matter how good you are, right, it's just you're not going to reach the audience. So like you put out a press release, and on the same day that something giant happens, like there's a big Slack outage, your press release is not going to get picked up. It wasn't anything you did wrong. It's just sometimes the audience isn't paying attention to you. And so I think that was a good lesson, like literally on the field. Cut your losses, go in. And then when it's a blowout, boy, everybody wants to see Alberta. All the little children, people pass you their babies and be like, here, hold my baby while I take a picture.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples. Not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz. Real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
I remember when I got hired at my first agency job out of college. In the interview process, one of the people interviewing me had recently been promoted to creative director. Now, he was interviewing me, okay? But I saw an opportunity to interview him as well, because being a college student at the time, that was my goal in my career, to grow to be a creative director. So when I asked him what it was like, I'll never forget what he told me. He said, well, I used to get to make things, to create, which is what I really love. Now I mostly manage people and processes. And that insight always stuck with me. I've always tried to keep my pen on the paper, even when I had to manage a team. So a lesson I read in a recent podcast guest application really resonated with me. Stay a player coach as long as you can. Joining me now to share the story behind that lesson, along with many more lesson-filled stories, is Val Riley, VP of Marketing and Strategy at Unbounce. Thanks for joining me, Val.
So happy to be here, Daniel. Thank you.
All right, let's take a quick look at Val's background, so you know who I'm talking to. She was Director of Content and Product Marketing at SharpSpring, VP of Content and Category Marketing at IP Pro TV. And for the past 3 years, she's been at Insightly, which was recently acquired by Unbounce, where she is the Vice President of Marketing and Strategy. As I mentioned, Insightly is owned by Unbounce, and in its most recent funding round, Unbounce raised $38.4 million and has 15,000 customers. Val manages a team of 16 with a budget of $4.5 million. So Val, give us a sense. What is your day like as VP of Marketing and Strategy?
Yeah, well, I'll zoom out and say like what a typical week looks like. I like to front load my week with meetings that are my team meetings, one-on-ones, and being part of the leadership team. That's a big part of my job, and it's a big part of the meeting landscape. So Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, I'm really in a lot of meetings, touching base with folks, moving projects along, keeping abreast of situations. And then as the week progresses, I get to be a little bit more creative, a little bit more hands-on. We'll have project discussions, brainstorming sessions. I'll actually roll up my sleeves and do some work on I love to have my hand in writing. I love to have my hand in design concepts, et cetera. So towards the end of the week, I'm definitely flexing more of that creative muscle.
I've asked that question to a lot of people, and a lot of people talk in day parts. Like, okay, in the morning I got my meetings, the afternoon this. I like you thinking of the big picture. All right, let me get this stuff done in the beginning of the week so I can get that creative stuff going in the end of the week. I like that.
All right, let's also have the benefit. I think it's a benefit of being across 3 time zones. So we have folks on the East Coast of the US and the West Coast of the US. So you can usually find some time, if you're an East Coaster, find a little time in the morning when it's quiet. And if you're a West Coaster, that's that time in the afternoon. So I like to think we chase the sun a little bit and kind of keep those quiet times precious, but then the time in the middle of the day, we're just all available to each other and really making the most of those hours.
Yeah, I like that as we're working with people on the West Coast. I find my mornings I can be a little more undisturbed and kind of get going in the morning and really focus on some things before the meetings hit. Okay, let's take a look at some of the lessons that Val has learned from her career. I always like to say that's a really cool thing we get to do as marketers. I've never done anything else. I've never been an actuary or a podiatrist, but I don't know that they make things. We make things. So the first lesson she learned from the career she has made is take a chance. So Val, how did you take a chance?
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to start with a technology company pretty early in my career, and it wasn't my intention, but I ended up staying there for 16 years. And it's just like every time I was thinking about leaving, something would happen. For instance, there was the financial crisis that happened, and all of a sudden, like no one was looking for a job and no one was hiring, or I would think about taking a new position and then something interesting would happen at the company where I would be like, oh, maybe I should stay a little bit longer. But 16 years is a real long time. While I was there, it was a software company. When I started, we had mainframe and client server applications, and really SaaS was born during those years. And so I got to launch the first SaaS application that company had. So it was 16 years. It was a long time. There was a lot of change, but I do look back at that time and wonder, maybe I stayed a little bit too long, because you hit a ceiling with your growth sometimes, I remember I went to a conference, and I had been at that point, it had been 15 years. I went to a conference and I was just sitting there and hearing terminology and acronyms and seeing tech that I was not familiar with. And I sort of started feeling like the industry, the career was passing me by. And so I got a little worried, thought, okay, well, maybe I'm not doing myself a service with this long tenure at this company. And so I was reached out to by a recruiter to go work at a startup. And it was a startup that had product market fit. So it wasn't brand new, craziness, but it was really early stage. And I looked at myself and I thought, this is the opportunity that's knocking. And if I don't take it, I'm going to stay at this company and I will probably retire here. But I could take this chance and go work for this startup and see if I have what it takes. And it was really crazy. My friends told me not to take the job. My husband told me not to take the job. My colleagues said I was nuts. I had this really cushy job. I was coming and going as I pleased. I had a private office, like everything was great. And I just knew in my heart that this was it. This was my chance to see if I could really do it. And so I left that cushy job and went to a startup, and it just kind of skyrocketed my career. So I'm glad I did it.
Okay, something I always like to do with our guests on how I made it in marketing. Like, it's not like, we're like, oh, we all agree on everything and let's move on to that thing or this thing. I always like let's look at the opposite of that. Okay, let's look at the opposite of what you're teaching. I agree with what you're saying. We should take a chance. It makes sense 16 years to go to a new firm. But in those 16 years at that company, did you ever take a chance and take on something new and still be able to grow internally at the company? And I ask you this because, well, two reasons. One, I've been here 16 years. It's funny. This is my 16th year at Marketing Sherpa and Mech Labs AI. But the other reason is I kind of hear this thing always, especially in our industry, in a lot of industries, especially in our industry, where it's like every 18 months, you got to be moving. If you're not moving, you're not moving up, then you're moving down, And it seems like when I look at, some LinkedIn's or just hear about some people's careers, it's just this constant churn in these different companies. And I can see a benefit in that. But one thing I will say, and have been in having been here 16 years, is it's like that famous quote, like, you can't step in the same river twice. It's not like it's been the same company for 16 years. We're in a fast moving industry. Like what I was doing in 2009, where it's like a blog was a key point of what we were doing, and like a webinar and stuff. And now, AI and all these different things we've done. And so what I've always tried to do is even reinvent my career with the opportunity within here, because the longer you're at a place, the more influence you have, the more ability you have to shape the company and not just your career, to shape the strategic direction and to launch new initiatives that you want to do without necessarily having to go externally. Now, saying that, of course, what you did was right. A lot of people should go to different jobs. But just wonder if you have any thoughts or examples of, in that 16 years at the company, it wasn't necessarily just, I'm sure you weren't sitting on your hands. You seem like a very, outgoing and adventurous person. Like, were there examples of you're like, okay, let me either take my personal career or department or company in a new direction without having to leave yet?
There were some spots in there where I do feel like I had growth. I mean, I was promoted multiple times. I think my skills and talents were definitely recognized. I also feel like no one will ever look at my resume and say, well, this is a person who isn't loyal, right? Because I definitely have proven that given the right circumstances, I'm not a job hopper. I will definitely stay long-term and ride out good times and bad times with the company. So I think those were both positives. Also, again, during that time, software made great changes we had basically launched software as a service, right? Up until then, everything was client server. And so I got to be on the team that launched the very first web app in that company. And so to be there for the birth of SaaS, really to experience that, but in an environment that was very safe and stable, was really a blessing, because I got to really understand what it took to put SaaS together and get it out the door. But I wasn't in an unstable environment or an environment where funding was running out. It was a very stable, slow growth company. And so there were those benefits as well of being able to learn and not being under the gun for results, because it was a privately held company that had very realistic growth expectations.
Well, when you talk about growing in your career, I really love this next lesson. Stay a player coach as long as you can. I feel that. I felt that in my career, like I said in the beginning. Tell me this story. How did you learn this lesson? How do you live it now?
Yeah, it's super important to me for a lot of reasons, but mostly because I feel like marketing changes so fast. I used to joke with my old CFO, who was great. I mean, we had a great relationship. I was the head of marketing, and she, I always came within 5% of budget every month. So I think that's why she liked me, but I think she really genuinely liked me. And I would joke with her about, like, sometimes your job looks really great to me, because when I look at this, I can't imagine there are a lot of different ways to read a balance sheet. I can't imagine that technology in finance is that disruptive, right? Like, essentially at the end of the day, we're making budgets, we're producing statements, we're closing out the month. I really feel like in marketing, if you don't keep your finger on the pulse, you will be so lost so quickly. Like, every week, maybe even every day, there's new terminology, there's new acronyms, there's new tech, there's always something new happening in our field. And so it can feel, if you don't keep hands on, if you end up becoming like, oh, well, I'm just somebody who manages people who do the work, and you remove yourself one step from the actual hands-on work, I feel like in marketing, that is like signing the death warrant of your career. I can't imagine that's the same in finance. I really do feel like you could be a little bit less hands-on, for example. But with the way MarTech moves, with the way just different technology, different methods. We had our funnel, then we flipped our funnel. It was all ABM, and then it was all, like waterfall. Like there's always something new in marketing. And if you are just managing people, in my opinion, you're doing yourself a disservice. I feel comfortable personally, and with maybe 4 direct reports, I feel like that's the right number for me. I was recently challenged by my CEO. He's like, you should really have more like 6 or 7 direct reports. And I have done that. I have added more direct reports because that's the company that I'm in right now. But I will tell you, I'm just working extra to still keep hands on, because my fear was adding 2 more direct reports, 2 more one-on-ones every week. I feel like that's taking me away from the real work of marketing. And it's a fear of mine, because I don't want to lose touch with the day-to-day hands-on work that marketers do. It's also the most fulfilling thing that we do. So you really don't want to lose that. If you're just end up managing people, I feel like it just takes the spark out of what is an amazing career.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that fulfillment part, because that's what I was going to say. I remember I was an advertising major at UF. There's something we have in common. And I don't know why you chose it, but I remember, I think it was Wheel Hall, whatever it was, where you first meet your admin, you sit down before you're a freshman, and they're like, what major do you want? And so University of Florida is a big school, and there's a lot of majors. And I remember looking like, I really want to be a film major. Like, that's what I want to do. But I'm like, I am not going to get a job as a film major. Like, I should probably be a business major, but that sounds boring. And then I saw that major advertising, and I'm like, well, this seems kind of half and half, right? You got the business piece, and I was a business minor, but you get to have the creativity of it. So it's like that fulfillment piece. I love that, of like, yeah, this is business administration. I don't know. I'm sure there's some people who are operational folks, and that's great for them. That's not why I got into this, But the piece I really want to ask you about, because I'm glad you mentioned your direct reports, is does staying a player coach help you make sure your team executes better? Like, do you have an example or a story of that, of having that hands-on acumen help you execute better? Because, for example, I interviewed on How I Made a Marketing, Jeffrey Kyle Holtz, the SVP of Marketing at Broadway Licensing Global. And one of his key lessons was execution sets people apart, right? And that's so true. In marketing, yes, we're an ideas industry, but I know a lot of people who can come up with a lot of ideas and they're not leading marketing departments because they can't get it done. And so what I've seen, like when I've managed teams, is when you have that hands-on experience, you know how to overcome the bottlenecks, right? You know when the budget is off, you know when the timelines are off, projects are off. So even though it's like, any good business manager, operational person can manage some of those things to some extent, they don't understand what that creation process, budget, all those elements are like. And that's where it really makes a difference, still having your hands in things. So I wonder for you, if you had any example or story you could think of like, being that kind of player coach person, it's not just, okay, that my personal fulfillment or staying up to date on things. It's, I can make sure our team executes because I know, like I know when I'm told the right thing or the wrong thing, or can help my team just overcome the bottlenecks that they're facing.
Yeah, I feel like one example, like a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Like I can sit here and describe what I want the landing page to look like. And I can say, well, take this from here, take that from there, et cetera. But I also can hands-on enough. I can go into Adobe XD. I can open it up. I can paste in different parts of different landing pages, type in the words that I want, and kind of make a very rough, rudimentary mock-up and give it to the designers and say, this is what I'm thinking. And then they could take that. That's their iteration one, and they iterate. And then from there, I'm getting exactly what my vision is, versus me having to like not have the ability to use XD. I mean, I just can't imagine being a marketing leader and not having access to the Adobe Creative Suite. Like I just have to be able to communicate in the language that my team uses. So, just doing a quick mock-up, or even for an ad, or here's what I'm thinking. And so they know what my vision is. And I'll tell you, 90% of the time, they take it and they make it so much more amazing than I ever envisioned it could be, which is great. But I just feel like because I'm hands-on, because I have those tools, I get us to first base a lot faster, and then they take it and they hit the home run. So just one example, but I feel like there are a million.
No, that's great. Clarity of direction. That's the worst thing you do for your team, is not give clarity of direction. I remember working on a tagline once at an agency, and I wasn't hitting it. And I didn't know what I was missing. And my boss just had a big, thick dictionary on his desk and just puts his hand on his dictionary. And it's like, it's in there somewhere. Like, I need a little better feedback than that. But all right, let's talk about kind of some more of that kind of business element and the growth of your career. You said M&A equals opportunity. So kind of take us through the story. How did this happen?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're in SaaS right now, you have either been purchased or about to be purchased, about to be merged. Like it's just all over. It's prolific. I really do feel like 2025 is going to be huge for that too. Like I think you have all these PE firms sitting on money, and it's their job to deploy capital. And like, listen, they've got to start deploying some capital. So if you haven't been a part of M&A activity, I'm telling you, it's coming. And so this is my third time being involved in M&A activity. And I had always had this fear of, like if that happens, people lose their jobs. And it's true. Sometimes in mergers and acquisitions, there are, redundancies. In my experience though, and I think it goes back to being a player coach, in my experience, I have always come out on top of M&A activity. I have always advanced, gotten a new title, additional responsibility. I was always retained. And again, because I'm hands-on and I manage, because I think I'm a hard worker. I think I'm someone who produces. It has always worked out well for me. So I say to people, don't necessarily see a merger or acquisition coming down the road and think, panic time. Let me get my LinkedIn ready. Let me start applying for jobs like crazy, because it could end up, if it has for me 2 times, knock on wood, that I have ended up in a higher position with additional responsibilities and sometimes even additional pay, just because I brought to the table like a quality skill set of player coach that was deemed valuable by the acquirer.
Okay, so give us a playbook, if you will, right? So let's say someone listening right now, right before they tuned in, they're driving home, right before they drove home, they got the email, we're getting acquired, we're merging with whatever. They're going to go into work tomorrow morning, the next week, the next month. Like, what are the 3 things they should do? Because what you mentioned about player coach, I think that's so important. There are some of these things, obviously, we should do way before a merger or acquisition happens, just in general, to position ourselves in our career, do the right things for our company, do the right things for our career. But let's say it just happened now. Well, if you sat down with them, you've gone through this 3 times yourself. What are a few things they should do tomorrow morning, next week, next month, as this kind of M&A rolls out? Because it tends to be like an instant hit, a shock to the system, and then this kind of, I don't know, what would you call it, messy marriage over several months. Partly depends also if the companies are public or not. And then there's a lot of stuff going on in the news too. But what advice would you give?
Okay, I love the term messy marriage. I'm definitely stealing that. So here's something, this is a real tip that I learned and I did not know before. Just before our merger, our CEO was able to go into a stealth mode and view the LinkedIn profiles of all of the team members of the marketing team that was being acquired. So, and in this case, there was an opportunity for marketing leadership, right? That the CEO saw, and he said, "Well, we're about to buy this company. Let's see who's in this company to see if maybe somebody here could end up leading the team." P.S. That was me. But the lesson is, my LinkedIn was perfectly up to date. I told a good narrative, a good story about what I do, what I bring to the table, and what my skill set was. Even though in my current role, about just before the merger, I was not leading a team, I had previously led a team before. And so my narrative in LinkedIn talked about that experience. And so that's why I was tapped to lead the joint Unbounce and Sightly team after the acquisition. So people can look at your LinkedIn in stealth mode. They have the skills. I had no idea it was happening, but luckily my LinkedIn profile was up to date and it was a good representation of my skills and what I bring to the table. So I would say everybody who can hear my voice, just make sure you've got a really good story there and you're accurately representing your skills, because you don't know who is looking. And you think you know who is looking because LinkedIn says, so-and-so looked at your profile. There is a stealth mode. They can see without you seeing. So big takeaway.
That's interesting. I never knew that. I never knew about that.
I did not either.
So, well, maybe when you go to your LinkedIn too, get a few referrals from former colleagues. And then what we're going to talk about next is we just talked about some of the things about how Val built her career. But in just a moment, we're going to talk about some of the people she built them with, because that's what we get to do as marketers. We build things, we build a career, we build them with people. But before we get there, I should mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MechLabs AI, the parent company of Marketing Sherpa. You can get conversion-focused training from the lab that helped pioneer the conversion industry in our AI Guild. Grab your free 3-month scholarship to the AI Guild at join.mechlabsai.com. That's join.mechlabsai.com and learn how to use artificial intelligence and conversion optimization to improve your results and your career. All right, let's talk about some of the people from your career that really had an impact on you that you learned from. The first person you mentioned was CMO Andrew Dodd. And from Andrew, you said you learned that marketing is like a soccer team. How'd you learn this from Andrew?
I love this analogy, and I think it's so true. So basically, if you think about a basketball team, right? The court is fairly small. You've got 5 players. If you've got Michael Jordan or LeBron James or Steph Curry on your team, you're going to score a lot of points, and you're going to be in contention for every game. Again, the court is fairly small. The number of players, there's only 5. So really, one player can have an impact. But Andrew said that marketing is like a soccer team. The field is huge. There's a ton of players, and just one person does not make a difference. And if you really want to take the sports metaphor, you can look at David Beckham when he went and played in the States and how he lost a ton, right? And you would think if you have David Beckham on your team, you're going to win. Not necessarily, because soccer requires coordination. It requires the pass. So think about marketing, right? Your content writers can have the best copy. And if it gets in an ad and the design is poor, it's not going to convert. Or maybe the content team writes a great copy. They give it to the design team. The design team kills it. Super great visual. And your paid media person runs that ad to the wrong audience. Guess what? It's not converting. Same thing. You can write a great email, but the marketing ops list person sends it to the wrong segment and it fails. So like we all need each other. There isn't a superstar. Everybody relies on the pass. So we are a soccer team, and you really have to like the players that you're working with. You really have to respect them. You have to trust that when you pass that they're going to do what they need to do and then do the next pass. That's the only way we score. And so I really felt like that analogy rang true for me. You could be on a team of 4, 8, 10, 30, but you still have those passes and you still need to rely on other people. The only way we're successful is if we all are working towards the same goal and on the same page. So, it's not a Michael Jordan. It's more of a David Beckham. And I really feel like that analogy resonates with folks.
I love analogies. As marketers, it's like part of the creative way. We just understand the world. So I want to extend this analogy. I'm going to try here. Let's see if this works. Okay. Right. So we got marketing is like a soccer team. Then the customer is kind of like the fan, right? Does that work? So I want to ask you an example of, okay, you're together with your team. Do you have any examples of how you put the customer first as a team? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges we have as marketers. So as Marketing Sherpa, we've done research. We found customer first marketing so much more effective, which is great. It is difficult to put the customer first. But so one example, to use a literal example of a company, a brand, I wrote a case study with Valencia CF, the soccer team. Mm-hmm. And during COVID, right, they had a significant challenge because they could not, during the pandemic, they could not have people come into their stadium. They literally could not serve their customer. And so what they did is, they went digital. They came up with all these digital interactive formats, quizzes, polls, tests, games, voting on favorite jerseys, giving prizes. And so what they did was they put their customer first during all this craziness. They're like, here's some ways we can interact. And they also put this other customer set they have first because they had sponsors who now couldn't get in front of people in the stadium, right? So they had kind of some inventory for the sponsors. And so they found, even in this difficult way, they found a way to like, okay, let's raise up the fan or the customer. So using your analogy, maybe painfully extending it, do you have any examples of how your soccer team, puts the customer first? Sometimes that's a trade-off. Sometimes, there's something short-term, we're going to take a hit, but long-term, it's going to help the customer.
Yeah, well, I think the essence of the soccer team puts the customer first, right? So again, like LeBron James takes the ball and he's going to the basket. No one's stopping him, right? It could be good. It could not be good. He could be thinking about the customer, or he could not be thinking about the customer. But the essence of the pass is that, the writer is relying on the designer is relying on the paid media person, the operations person, but each of those people can have a customer lens. So you get like a check at every point. It's not like you're just saying, oh, one person's going to run with this. Everybody is in it. So everybody has a chance to say, hey, maybe this copy isn't perfect, copy team, or maybe this copy isn't working with the visual. Maybe we should huddle and see if we can make this better. Or the paid media person gets it and says, hey, I'm going to push this back a little bit and say, hey, I'm not sure if I have the right audience for this. What are we trying to achieve? So I think it's just those little checkpoints that are just inherent in the pass that put the customer first, because you have so many people bringing their customer lens to everything versus just one person, railroading something down the lane. So.
Yeah. Well, what we're doing now, even in talking about this, and something I've heard from a lot of guests is when we're done recording, is usually like, wow, I didn't really reflect on my career that much. I kind of just went through and did these things, and I never really took that time to do that reflection. I think it's so helpful. So I love one of your lessons. You said, literally reflect on the day. This seems like it's something you do every day. And you learn this from COO Barry Pruitt. So how do you learn this from Barry, and how do you use this kind of mindset every day?
Yeah. So went to another startup and led the marketing team, and was fortunate to work with Barry. And he had this kind of habit that he did at the end of every day, where he would go home and before he went to bed, he would just think back to, how did I do today? How did individual interactions go? And where do I think I had my best self? And where do I think maybe I could have expressed myself better or communicated better? And we all want to think back on the positive stuff that makes us feel good, but thinking back on the negative stuff or things that you feel like maybe didn't go as great is hard. But that's where the growth is. And so what I noticed was, as he was my supervisor, a few times he would, just towards the beginning of our relationship, he would come into my office in the morning and say, "Hey, yesterday when I said this," and he would, backtrack, or he would clarify. And I sort of just started noticing this pattern. And I said to him once, like, "I notice sometimes you come back in and you tell me something that, we did yesterday that you want to kind of switch up." And he's like, "Well, here, I have this habit that I do, that every evening I review the day." And I was like, wow, like that just seemed to me to be such a mature way to approach your professional life. I guess even your personal life, truth be told.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, maybe there's a lesson there for me too. And so I started doing it. And I'm going to warn you, it can feel a little uncomfortable, because you can think back to stuff and think, oh, like I really didn't handle that very well. And so it pushes you to become a better professional, a better coworker, a better supervisor, to go to your direct report and say, "Hey, when we had this call yesterday, I wasn't in the best headspace. I think I may have, not come with my full energy. I apologize for that. If you want to reschedule, let's do it." Really coming in and owning your behavior is a very mature thing to do. And I think that's a great lesson, and not the easiest one, but it's definitely one that I've tried to emulate.
No, I love that. And you said, hey, sometimes we don't want to reflect on the negative. We just reflect on the positive. I mean, from what I've found really where we are today, and this is kind of where my career has changed, because I started in print and things have just fast forwarded, with digital. And so it's not even that we're only reflecting on the positive. We just don't reflect because there's the next deadline and the next results and the next quarter and and we're just on to the next thing and we're on to the next thing. So I love that lesson. But as I mentioned, something we do is reflect on our career. And one thing I've noticed, we often reflect on, there's a kind of a timeline in our life that we consider our career. And when you mention LinkedIn, it's funny, it usually starts post-college in our first professional job. But sometimes what I've learned is some very early roles we have that seem unrelated to marketing, we can learn a lot from. And an interesting thing about your background is you were Alberta the alligator. And I have to ask, is there anything you learned from that time being a mascot that you have applied to your career in a specific way? And for those who don't know, I'll just mention. So again, as I mentioned, me and Val are both alums of the University of Florida. If you haven't heard of it before, I'm sure it's a very big school. And so being Alberta the alligator, being the mascot, I mean, you could be on the field in front of 80,000 fans. You could be on the field in front of millions of people on TV. So that is a similarity to content marketing, to kind of being out there. But you also, I would imagine, have to one-on-one deal with a lot of people, maybe children, maybe drunk frat guys. I don't know. So I just wonder, from that whole, I mean, there's a big, customer ambassador element to a branding. There's so many different elements that seem kind of like related to our field. Was there anything you learned from that very early time, pre-career, we could say, that you've then applied to your marketing career?
I would say two big lessons came out of that. So number one is, sometimes if the game is really good, the fans don't care about you, right? And what that means is, like, if the game is tight, everybody's really hyper focused on the game, and you could be doing the craziest antics on the sidelines and no one's paying attention. And I think that that's a good lesson for marketing, because sometimes, no matter how good you are, right, it's just you're not going to reach the audience. So like, you put out a press release, and on the same day that something giant happens, like there's a big Slack outage, your press release is not going to get picked up. It wasn't anything you did wrong. It's just sometimes the audience isn't paying attention to you. And so I think that was a good lesson, like literally on the field. Cut your losses, go in. And then when it's a blowout, boy, everybody wants to see Alberta. All the little children, people pass you their babies and be like, "Here, hold my baby while I take a picture." Meanwhile, by the way, we can't see. I'm holding your baby and all I see is like straight ahead. So very, very nerve wracking. But the other huge takeaway from being a mascot, or from like any crazy job you may have had before your professional career started, is it is the number one conversation starter in an interview. Every single job I have ever had. So people will start the interview and they'll say, "You are a college mascot. Tell me about that." It's an icebreaker. It's a way people can relate to you. I always have a funny story. it's something that is a great way to begin any sort of conversation on any sort of job interview. So I look back at it, and I only did it for a little bit over a year, but it has helped me throughout my career because it's just the number one icebreaker. It's such a great way to start a conversation with anyone. And people who are into college sports, people are into professional sports, people that even aren't into sports, everybody has a question about walking around in a giant fursuit. So super easy to make a connection.
I love that. And also talking about reflecting on your career, I wanted to ask you, you have had a long and prosperous career. It's worked well. And I think you've done it the entire time. We mentioned University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. And I wonder if there's any specific lesson you learned from that. And I ask you because I remember my first agency, I started here in Jacksonville. We had a big sign up on the wall and it said, "To hell with New York," because marketing and advertising, this industry, New York, San Francisco, I mean, maybe now you could say Boston, Chicago, Austin, there's some other cities. It was a very concentrated in a few specific megalopolises, at least here in the United States, and I'm sure in other countries as well. And, in my time in it, obviously things have changed where remote work has become more common. I mean, I started remote work in like 2004 and have gone back and forth to remote and in person. But, it used to be a thing of like, you needed to be where the action is. You need to be in one of those key cities and make sure it's happening. So I'm sure there's a lot of other people listening that might prefer a lifestyle somewhere else. Gainesville's a lovely city. There's a lot of other, small towns. I shouldn't even say city, maybe town that people live in. Remote work, yes, it has grown in the past few years. But did you learn anything from kind of building a career in this town that we can learn from?
Yeah, I will say early on, Gainesville is a fairly small city. There's a big concentration of academia and healthcare. And I had a fascination with tech. And pretty early on, I thought, I'm going to have to, if I want to stay here and build my career here, I'm going to have to either switch to academia or get somehow involved in medical, because there's a lot of medical centers here, like hospital PR. And in my heart, I really just didn't want to do that. And so I held strong. I went to work in economic development, and this economic development organization was focused on tech companies. And so that's where I finally started to see the number of small tech companies that were in Gainesville. And I was like, oh, hallelujah, like there's something here. And it was small and there weren't a ton of them, but I was able to make connections in the tech community and stay with the field that I wanted. And then eventually just work for software companies here in Gainesville. So I almost gave up hope, because the proliferation of tech companies in a small town, a small southern town, not so great, but I was able to find what I was looking for if I just made those connections and looked hard enough. So I would say hold on to what you really feel passionate for, because you can find it. It's certainly not the scale of New York. It's certainly not the scale of the Bay Area, but you can find it. And then, as you mentioned, with remote work, the company I work for now, the original company I was hired for is in the Bay Area. So they, I interviewed and got the job completely remotely, and the company ended up during the pandemic going 100% remote, distributed workforce. So I feel like in the end, it paid off that I stuck to my guns, and I did get the quality of life that I wanted being in a small city. So I really do think it's possible now, but I would say if your passion is somewhere, you can find it. It might not be the scale that you're looking for, but I really believe you can find it if you stick to it.
So in a small city, and just even in an industry, a lot of times your reputation precedes you. And so it's really important to make sure you've got the reputation out there that you want to represent you. And so I really like your last lesson here. Kind of heartwarming, but I like it as it's true. Nice people still win. Like I got to imagine that's really important for being a small town, but just in any industry. You said you learned this from CMO Chip House. So how did you learn this, and how can you convince us that this isn't just something we want to feel like is true, that is actually true?
So Chip was the CMO at Insightly, and he was like the quintessential Midwesterner. And I had always heard that Midwestern people were nice, but holy cow, like if he wasn't the nicest person. And, as CMO, it's a difficult role. I'm feeling it now just in my role. It's, there's never enough leads, there's never enough quality, there's never enough quantity. The kind of get beaten down by the sales team, and, the budget's never enough, and you're always shoestringing stuff together and trying new things, and some things fail and some things don't. And he never ceased to have a positive attitude. He never was one to blame other teams or place fault with individuals or their efforts. He was just like, we're just going to keep on going. We're just going to stay positive. We're going to keep on going. So he was the CMO at SharpSpring, where I worked previously. And then we worked together at Insightly, and just two high pressure environments. And he just never became a jerk. And I was like, there's a lesson there for sure. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, and so at heart. And so I feel like I can very easily go down that path of, being, having a New Yorker attitude. And I think Chip just taught me that, being kind, being nice, that's the way to get the most out of people. And you can still be a kind person and really be an effective marketing leader.
So I love hearing that. But I also wonder how that applies to how we treat our customers. Because one of the things you said about Chip is he was able to deliver feedback in a supportive way. So when you have to deliver feedback to customers or potential customers, sometimes you have to show them there's a pain point. Is there anything you've learned on how to do that in a kind of positive and supportive way? Because for us, for example, one thing that's worked, because, I'll get these messages like, your website sucks, your SEO sucks, this is horrible. And I'm thinking like, that's the first relationship you want with me as a potential customer. You're going to insult me? Like, you might be right, but that's your foot in the door, right? And so one thing we've done as a company that's worked well is, as I mentioned, we have live events. And so we would run these contests, right? Where we would get like a nonprofit or maybe a sponsor and be like, okay, we're going to test their landing page or test their email or something. And we would get the whole audience involved in doing it to see what won, right? So we'd work together, create some hypotheses with the audience. We'd actually test them during the event, and then they would see the results by the end of the event. And this did two things that was really helpful. One, it removed their brand from it, right? Because when it's your own brand, you can be defensive. Like, what do you mean? I worked so hard on this. I remember starting at a position, and I came in badly because I was saying everything that was wrong. And then someone pulled me aside and like, all this stuff is wrong, but we worked really hard to get it this wrong. It was way wronger before, right? So that's one thing. But the other thing is also, we took them on the journey, right? It wasn't just day one of the event, first 5 minutes, like, you guys are horrible and don't know about landing page optimization, right? It was like, okay, here's our goal. Let's work together on it. And then as they work through the journey, they realize, ooh, I wish I knew this better or that better or that, So by the time you get to the end, you've got a real world test. It's like, okay, now there's an openness in them. They got that feedback. Hopefully we're nice people to do it. They got that feedback. I want to learn more and I want to improve here, right? So for you, Val, a pain point, we all know it's an important in to a customer. Some companies use FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt, right? They kind of come in with these negative ways. Have you found to be like still a nice person, a nice brand, but to start getting across to the customer, hey, there's a pain point. There's a place you need to improve here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say we had a recent instance where there was some tough love. So our CRM had a freemium, which was an extremely generous freemium. You could have 2 users, like tons of storage, free in perpetuity. And the idea was, as you grow as a company, you need more seats, more powerful CRM that you would stick with Insightly and grow with us. But I think it ended up being a little too generous. And so we decided as a company, we're going to end this free program and we're going to offer to move folks to a paid account. We gave them a long period of time where they could decide to upgrade or not. And honestly, like, people who had used our free CRM for 7, 8, 9 years, never paid us a penny, and were just so like, just had the audacity for them to say like, hey, this absolutely should still be free forever. I was just like, okay. So it was just kind of shocking, like, again, like the audacity. And so we had this whole communications plan and we had this whole rollout, and we gave them this very generous coupon code. And we're like, hey, we'd like for you to stay with us or whatever. But just dealing with those folks during that process really taught us a lot. Like, this is a mission critical piece of software, the CRM is, and these people were relying on it, and now we have switched it up on them. So how can we have grace for this change while also moving them in the direction we need them to move, either convert to a paid customer or decide, hey, I'm going to take my business elsewhere. Like, those are both fine outcomes. And so in the end, we ended up converting a pretty high percentage of folks to a paid account. But having the grace during that time period for people who were just so upset that, again, like this gravy train had come into the station a little bit, I think that there were some good lessons there in understanding the customer and putting yourself in the position of the customer and trying to advocate for them as much as you could while still having the goals of the company in mind.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of nice summation of what it is to be a marketer. Advocate for the customer, but have the goals of the company in mind. Which brings up my final question is, What are the key qualities of an effective marketer, Val?
So in my opinion, if you are going to have a career in marketing, you have got to commit to always be learning. If you are someone who wants to learn a skill set and then sit back and just rinse and repeat for the rest of your career, you can find a lot of great things to do, but marketing is not one of them. Every week, every month, there's new technology. There are new acronyms. There's new strategies. There's new philosophies. I personally listen to multiple marketing podcasts. I subscribe to multiple marketing newsletters. And still sometimes I'll log in or I'll see something and I'll be like, gosh, I don't know what that is. And it requires a lot of time outside of your day-to-day work to just stay abreast of what's happening in the market, what's happening in technology. How is this career continuing to evolve? So if you're not interested in doing that, this is not the career for you. But if you are a lifelong learner, I think that's the number one quality for an effective marketer.
That's great. And hopefully everyone listening, yes, multiple, we don't care what the other ones are, but How I Made It Marketing podcast from Marketing Sherpa, the Marketing Sherpa newsletter. This is the one you should be listening to. So
all of the above.
Right. Anyway, thanks so much for your time, Val. It was a real pleasure. I learned a lot.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great. And it's always nice to meet a fellow Gator.
Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketing, SHERPA.com.